So thank you for joining us today for our Shopify partner session. Like I said, I'm really excited about the topic we'll be discussing over the next hour, which is 7 principles of product design with Aarron Walter. Over the next hour, Aarron is going to chat with us about product design best practices that he's learned throughout the years of his experience and the extensive research he's done with companies that are winning market share through design. We're hoping that the principles we covered today will help you work through your ideas more clearly so you can in turn create great, amazing products yourself. Like I said, my name is Simon Heaton. I work here at Shopify as the head of content marketing for our partner program, and I'm super excited about this talk. Just so you all know, the webinar will be recorded today, so if you have to jump off or your connection gets interrupted for any reason, we'll be sending out the video to all registrants in about a week or so you don't have to worry there. Now, on to our guest. I'm very excited to introduce Aarron Walter. He is the VP of Design Education at InVision, as well as the author of a few books, including Designing for Emotion, which many of you might have read as it's one of a book apart's top books. Aarron is no stranger to the world of product design. He has formerly worked at MailChimp as the director of UX, the general manager of new products, and I'm assuming many other unofficial titles as well. He's also worked as a consultant for many years, advising some of the world's biggest brands, including Intuit, American Express, Stanford, and the White House. The list could go on and on, I'm sure, but I think I'm just going to end it there. And I just wanted to say, Aarron, that we're thrilled to have you here today.
Oh, well, thank you so much for having me. Excited to be here. Cool. So let's get started.
Yeah, and while Aarron's talking, if anyone has any questions they'd like to ask him, feel free to drop them into the questions panel, and we're going to be trying to answer them in the last kind of 10 minutes of the presentation once Aarron's wrapped up. But with that being said, I'm going to hand the reins over to Aarron, and we'll dive right into the content.
Awesome. Well, thanks everybody for stopping by, making some time for this webinar today. I'm excited to chat with you. Simon gave me a lovely introduction, so we'll give you my background. But I want to talk to you guys about product design. It's something I'm really passionate about and I've been doing for a long time now. And now in my new role as VP of Design Education at InVision, I spent a lot of time talking to different companies and visiting companies and starting to see where design teams break and struggle as they work on different products, and also some common patterns of where they succeed, which is how I kind of stumbled upon these principles here. So what's interesting is as I look at the landscape of all these different types of companies, startups for a long time have been very focused on design because it's they can use design as leverage to compete against big brands. But what we're seeing is a shift not only with these smaller companies being competitive on design, but also really large companies like IBM. IBM is one of the largest companies on the planet. I think they're Fortune 10-ish, and they're in the process of hiring 2,000 designers. So they're about to become the largest design organization in the world. They've hired a ton of designers, and they've bought multiple design companies, all because they're prioritizing design. Just a few years ago, it would have been laughable to make this statement that Google is a design-focused company. This is a company that's prided itself on its engineering prowess, and after there's a change in command as Eric Schmidt left and new CEO Larry Page took over, there was a mandate set that we've got all these different applications and we need to create a consistent Google experience. So that required focusing on design, and now they're not just focusing on design for their products, but their design system material is also the groundwork for so many different apps on so many different devices these days. So that's a big shift. Salesforce, yet another company that I never would have guessed would be a very design-focused company, but they too have gobbled up lots of different companies and organizations, and they have to create a unified experience to be competitive. So what's happening? Why are all these big companies starting to get the religion of design and focus on it? Well, it's because they recognize that they're competing in a different way now. They're competing on experience. They're not competing on a matrix of features. You know, that my product does 50 things and your product does 45 things. Well, that doesn't necessarily indicate that there's a quality experience, a usable, pleasurable experience present there. And customers are ever more sophisticated because software is present in every aspect of our life. Our phones are with us, and they're controlling our homes. They're connected to financial institutions. They're part of our educational experience. Everything that we can think of, every different market sector that we can think of, software is influencing and disrupting that sector in a significant way. And because we're all using software all the time, we're no longer walking into a Barnes & Noble to buy iOS for Dummies. Those books, I'm sure they're not selling very, very well these days because we're no longer dummies. We're very sophisticated, and we vote on good experiences with the home screen of our phone. So now companies have to think more about design. But the problem is that product design is really difficult. You can't just hire 2,000 designers and buy 5 companies, set those designers loose, and expect to create competitive, elegant experiences with your products. You actually have to start to think about product design and in all of its different facets. It's so complicated. And the problem, you know, when you've got a monolithic problem like product design, where we're designing for new customers and veteran customers, legacy customers, we're designing for lots of different devices and contexts. These are monolithic problems, and the way that we solve monolithic problems is we break them into smaller pieces, small bits. And that's how we solve those problems more effectively. And breaking these problems into small pieces means focusing on principles, focusing on what is not a trend, what is not fly by night, but what is something we can count on. These are principles that if we follow these are our guide to help us make great products. That's what I want to talk to you guys about today. This is what I'm seeing as I visit companies, as I visit design-driven companies or companies that are going through a transition. We call them little d companies. There's a big D company where they understand design and they've already kind of leveled up in multiple ways to create a really successful organization that uses design as its main competitive advantage. And then there are companies that are trying to make that transition, and maybe that's your organization right now. You're trying to make that transition where design is more critical in your process. So these principles will hopefully help get you started in that transition to becoming a big D company that's focused on design, and it's your main competitive advantage. So the first principle that I want to share with you is called guess less. Guess less. So I can't really see all of you, but I would be willing to bet that many of you have played the lottery. Maybe once, maybe a few times. I'll admit I have played the lottery quite a few times actually, and in fact I've even found myself going out late into the evening because I had forgotten to buy a lottery ticket for the big jackpot, and get dressed, go out, stand in line to buy $10 worth of lottery tickets, knowing full well I'm probably not going to win this thing. In fact, you are much more likely to get struck by lightning, not one time, but 2 separate times in your life. You're more likely to have that happen than to win the lottery. The odds are very low. What's this have to do with product design? Well, product design is actually a lot like the lottery. The reason why we play the lottery is because we see winners on the nightly news, and we make the assumption that there's a winner. Someone's got to win, might as well be me. That's what I always hear from people. Excuse me. And similarly, in product design, we see winners every day. We see Facebooks, we see Googles, we see Salesforce, we see Airbnb, we see Ubers. We see all these big winners. They won the lottery, and they're billion-dollar companies, they're unicorns. And we're designing products, we're creating companies, and we think it's, someone's got to win, it might as well be me. I'm going to win the software lottery. But the way that we work, the way that we design software, especially in Silicon Valley, is we optimize for speed. So we want to design a thing and put it out into the world as fast as we can, learn from our mistakes. The mantra is fail fast, right? The quickest way to deliver on that promise, to fail fast, is to base your products on guesses. Guesses about whether or not this idea is valid, whether or not this idea is relevant to your customer base, whether or not this idea is better than all the other competitors in this busy market, whether or not it's designed well enough and intuitively and made to be an enjoyable experience for customers that they will want to use this on a regular basis instead of using either the incumbent or doing what they've always done in a more simple way. We've got a lot to overcome. And when we base product designs on guesses, when we optimize for speed at the beginning, when we don't stop and actually talk to customers and learn from customers, we are guessing and we are hoping for the best. We are playing the lottery at high stakes. My friend Laura Martini, she's a product designer and design leader. I feel like she succinctly summed up the crux of the problem here, that you win a race at the finish line, not at the starting block. So as product designers, as product teams, we feel compelled to make a thing as quick as possible so we can learn. But the problem is, if you don't yet understand all aspects, all perspectives of the problem, you could be working really hard on the wrong thing. You could be running a race in the wrong direction. If you don't orient yourself in the right direction, you're not going to win. You're not going to get to the finish line. We win the race at the finish line, not at the starting block. Similarly, Braden Cowitz at GV Google Ventures sums it up very nicely. When designers don't know which problems to solve, we spin our wheels. We make products prettier when we could be solving customers' needs and generating real value. So any company that's serious about design should get equally serious about listening to customers. Right? So we've got to get better at learning. The software industry is not going to go slower. It's not going to take its time. We definitely feel compelled to get to market quickly, and we can do that, but we don't have to do that based on guesses. We can learn fast. So here are a couple things that I have personally done in my practice when I was running the UX team at MailChimp. And I've seen other companies do similar things. First of all, there are ways to be learning in the background, that you can be surveying customers on a regular basis. Use any survey tool that you choose, SurveyMonkey, SurveyGizmo, Typeform, Wufoo. Pick your poison here. Right? But we can run surveys and then we can filter those results afterwards to start to learn about customers. Now, I will say there is an art to creating a great survey, an art that is far more complicated than I can address today with you in this 1 hour. Excuse me once again. But there's a lot of stuff online that can guide you there. So one of the surveys that you can run on a regular basis and have this run in an automated way is an onboarding survey. So if you're selling a SaaS product, you've got some sort of product that people are signing up for, the following day, or maybe even the same day that they sign up, a few hours later, you can send an onboarding survey asking them what led them to sign up. Sorry guys, struggling with this cold here. So an onboarding survey might ask questions about if they're switching from a competitor, which one, what were the most compelling things that caused them to sign up, what are their intentions or their goals as they sign up. That can help you tailor the user experience for them. So there's a lot of things that potentially could be asked here that, and I always conclude every survey with an open field that says, is there anything else you want to tell us? The reason why I do that is because people say surprising and odd things. I call these folks the weirdos, the oddballs that are using the product in an interesting way, are doing something that you hadn't anticipated. These are the folks that are going to show you the future of your product, and they're going to give you insights about how to refine your product too. So be on the lookout for those. And when all these surveys come in, you can use a tool like Zapier, Zapier.com, Zapier.com. It's so great. So it doesn't matter what survey tool you're using. You can set up a Zap in Zapier to, it will listen to that survey tool and see when someone has responded, and then it can funnel it to an Evernote account. It can funnel it to a Google Doc, to any number of places where you might want to dump that, so you can analyze that later. So another type of surveys that you can set up is an account close survey. So these are people that have closed their account, they've left the company, left your service, and they probably have some pretty good feedback to offer. Now, you're not going to get as good a response rate from these folks because they've made their decision, they're moving on, and they may not want to take the time to tell you why they're leaving. But those that do will have some gems for you that can help you understand how to refine the service. It could simply be a brand perception thing. It could be that they think that your product doesn't do something, but it actually does, and you're just not doing a very good job of educating your customer, helping them level up with the product. So you can learn a ton from these. So what these two surveys, you're learning from people who just bought and people who just left. And those cohorts of customers, there's a lot of different types of cohorts that you could be looking at, but to start with, these two are going to teach you a great deal. So you've got all this survey information coming in, and you can start to analyze that, put it in spreadsheets, read all of the feedback. That sounds tedious. It is. I have read through tens of thousands of survey responses. It can be tedious, but it will help you understand your customer. It will help you understand your product so much better. So it's a valuable, useful investment of your time. So as you read through these survey responses, you're going to start to see patterns where people are saying the same things over and over again of why they bought, why they left, and you're going to find people that you want to interview. The survey is really not the primary goal here, those responses. They'll teach you a lot, and that's great. But the primary goal is to find people that you can speak to. Now, ideally, you can speak to them in person, but speaking to them on the phone is cool too. And because this data is always rolling in, you've always got this spreadsheet of email addresses and people and comments, feedback from your customers. You're always learning. Someone you can get on the phone for 15 minutes and get some feedback. And depending on how you're recruiting them, you can get very targeted and very specific with the type of person who's using a specific feature of your product. And you can get them on the phone when you're working on refining that or working on a new version of that product, and learn more before you start building and designing. So you collect all of these notes from customers you're speaking to, putting them all into one central place. That's the ideal. So companies that I see that are very design-driven and that are putting this principle, guess less, into practice in kind of the upper tier sort of way, they manage to collect all that survey data, all the notes from their customer interviews, all in one spot. And they do that sort of like this. If you think about streams of data, streams of information dumping into a clearinghouse where anyone can search, find patterns, ask crazy weird questions. That's the idea. That's what we want to do. And it's not just survey responses and customer interviews. You can set up things like Google Analytics to send you a report every week, Monday at 9 a.m., on mobile usage of your app, or something else that's relevant to your interests. Excuse me. So you can do this, you can set this up in a really inexpensive, easy way using something like Evernote. I've done that in the past. The reason why I used Evernote is not because it was perfect, but because it was simple enough that it's got a secret email address that I could point Google Analytics and all these different data sources to that one spot. When survey response comes in, it can be sent over to Evernote with that secret email address, and it's collected in one spot where it's searchable. So here are some things you can do to put Guess Less into practice at your company. First, you can set up some onboarding and account closing surveys. It's really easy to do. As you set these up, you're going to want to kind of keep a close eye on the responses to make sure that you dial in the survey really well. That's something that when I was running the UX team at MailChimp, especially that account closing survey, we dialed that in for multiple years, and it got progressively better. Consider setting up a feedback form on your site, a simple contact form where people can voice their thoughts about your product and how it's working or not working well for them. I will tell you, you'll get a ton of noise from this, but you also will get a lot of signal. And if you use that Evernote trick that I talked about with the secret email address that can point the incoming emails into an Evernote notebook, then you can go back and search that and find what's meaningful there. Ideally, you want to set up short interviews with your customers, and if you can, visit local customers to see their hardware, see how they're interrupted, see what it's like to work there. The second principle is story first. So stories are a very powerful tool. We've been using them for thousands of years to communicate our most important messages. This is how we shape culture. This is how religion was formed. We've been sitting around campfires telling stories for thousands of years. And today, we're probably spending less time sitting around real campfires and more time sitting around metaphorical campfires like Twitter or Facebook. A story is an incredible vehicle to help us understand what the vision is for a product. And product teams that are really succeeding manage to bring together multiple teams. They're designers, engineers, product managers, executives, quality assurance people, support people, marketing. There's so many different people that have to understand the vision for the product and support that in their own way. So we need to establish a North Star, something that sets the product vision so everyone can see this is what we're trying to make, this is where we're going. The idea with a product story is that it answers a single question. How is your product going to fit into the lives of your customer, right? Keeps us focused. If we think about what guides us in our day-to-day work, there is a roadmap. Those of us on product teams, the roadmap is gospel. It tells us what to do and when, but it doesn't tell us why. It doesn't tell us why we're doing what we're doing. And that's a really key factor, because without the why, we're not thinking critically about how to make this product fit into someone else's life. We're not thinking about the customer. We're not thinking about the bigger picture. And those companies that are the unicorns, that are succeeding, they are definitely thinking about how their product fits into others' lives. So I mentioned that story is this really powerful tool that can communicate product vision. Well, there's been a lot of research done to understand that more carefully. Dr. Jennifer Aker, who's a professor at the Stanford University Business School, points out that people remember information when it's weaved into narratives up to 22 times more than if we present just facts alone. And this is interesting to me because working in product teams in different companies, I hear statistics bandied about. I see data taken as gospel all the time. And that's great. quantitative information is really important. But story, which is not quantitative, it's qualitative, that this thing that we've been using to communicate messages for thousands of years, is a more effective vehicle to get teams on board with an idea, to see the product vision and move towards it. So I want to give you a specific example of a company that has created product vision so effectively. We can see it play out in the success of their company, and we can also see how that affected the organizational structure of the company as well, Airbnb. So in 2012, Airbnb had gotten a ton of investment from venture capitalists. By all intents and purposes, they had, the marks of success written all over the company and all the key metrics. But nonetheless, Brian Chesky, who's the co-founder and CEO, had some reservations or concerns about how would the company go through a big transformation. How would they grow and realize this vision they have for the hospitality industry, and how that can be changed in the sharing economy. And he happened to be reading about Walt Disney and the history of the Disney studio, and realized that Disney Studio, when it took on its most ambitious project, its first full-length animated film in the 1930s, that was Snow White. They started it in the 1930s. When they embarked on that project, that journey, they were the same size as Airbnb was in 2012. So that caused them to reflect, well, what did they do? How did they make this leap to get everyone on board with this big idea? Because making a full-length animated feature, that sounds like not that big of a deal to us these days, but it was a huge deal back then. Animation was historically just 8-minute shorts that were tacked on to the beginning of the real movies. Film was seen as art, or was heading in that direction. Animation was slapstick comedy that was cute and keeps the kids entertained. So for Disney to think of a full-length animation, full-length animated feature, color, sound, music, it's not slapstick. It's going to make people feel something really profound. It can, while other animation studios were making people laugh, Disney wanted to make people cry. That's what he was trying to do. Tall order. And Chesky discovered that the device that helped get that entire 250-person company at Disney Studios on board, it was just a storyboard. The storyboard was what created the product vision for the company. A storyboard was something that showed each frame, key frame of the story, that here's how this story would unfold, here's how the characters change, here's the conflict and the resolution. All of that could be summed up very concisely in one place where people could gather around, have a conversation, talk about it. And Chesky was so blown away by this, he felt like we could do the same thing. We're the same size company. Why can't we use a storyboard to talk about the guest experience for Airbnb and the host experience? Because their product is complicated in that way, that the user experience is divided between the two. And so they actually hired Pixar illustrators to come in and work with people from lots of different teams inside of the company. And they got this shared ownership to create this vision for the experience that they wanted to create for the guest and the host. And they storyboarded it, and it's still up in their offices today, in their headquarters. And it's been so central that they organize their teams around these storyboards too. That there's the design team, development team that works on the host experience and the guest experience. And each one of these frames is this grounding point, this product vision that says, okay, how do we design this product to work in this situation? When I'm booking, when I show up at the front door and I meet the host for the first time. What is that like? How can we enhance that? How can we make that a better experience? How does our product fit into the lives of our customers? such a brilliant tool that guides them, and that's going on for almost 5 years now. So it turns out you do not actually have to hire Pixar artists to create a storyboard. You could do it just with your phone. It's so easy. If you're working in a small team, you guys can talk through the steps of the user experience and act out and photograph each step of that journey. You can. This is a really crude one that we did at MailChimp for a product that we want a Webby for called Snap, and it breaks down to all these different frames. Sometimes there's an actor, or it's actually just a friend of ours in the frames. Sometimes it's just pictures of what the app might look like. So this was prepared in an afternoon. It's really quick and easy to do. Your phone has a great camera. You could even shoot a little video with your camera if you wanted to. When you've got these photos, you can drop them in Keynote. You can print them and put them on the wall, write on a board, to explain what this is more. But it's a really simple thing to do that's quick and easy to give you product vision. And if you're working on a bigger project that has a longer time horizon, you might want to think about investing in video instead to create product vision. The video takes a little bit longer to produce, but it doesn't have to take that much longer. You have to have a little bit of camera equipment and probably someone who knows a bit about shooting video. There will be some editing and maybe a script. But I've actually worked on a product vision video, and we did it in about 10 days using equipment that we had on hand, digital SLR. We hired a couple actors, but they were very inexpensive, and we mostly worked with friends in locations that were free. Wrote a script and shot this, and we produced a video that guided us on a project for 4 months long. And it's easy. You drop this on Vimeo and share that with the whole company. People can watch it. They get the vision for where they're going very easily. Now, in our video, we weren't showing the UI at all. It's just showing people. There's little speech bubbles that would kind of show what they're thinking and what's going on. But we're not showing the UI. Designers will figure that out later. Developers will work on that as well. It's just showing how this product fits into people's lives. So, things you can do to put story first. You can use sticky notes to storyboard the product experience, or you could use your phone to produce a quick photo storyboard, stitch it all together into Keynote, drop it into Google Slides so you can share it with a lot of people very quickly. It's a simple, easy thing to do that helps you focus on what you're doing. If you're working on a longer project, short video can be the way to go. Produce that in-house is my recommendation instead of farming it out to someone else. It's super easy to do. The third principle that I want to share with you today is pencils before pixels. Pencils before pixels. So I've noticed something that in our industry, product design, software design, we tend to jump straight to the computer. Why do we do that? Because we feel fluent, it feels natural, it's the medium that we're producing and releasing products in. But oftentimes when we do that in the computer, this is a space where precision happens easily. Pixels are aligned to a grid. We can choose fonts. Colors are vivid. Images are at our fingertips. All of these things are good because they help us work quickly, but they take our focus away from the problem we're trying to solve and move us into the fiddly bits of design, the style, the feel. That stuff is important, but it needs to come later. The first part of the creative process is ideation. And if we look at any medium, let's take architecture, for example. If you were to walk into Frank Gehry's studio, in fact, you're with me right now, you're in front of a computer, go to Google Images and search for Frank Gehry's studio. You're going to see photos of an explosive mess. There are so many maquettes and models and drawings and sketches and piles of paper. It's creative chaos. Things are everywhere. Why? Because they start broad, exploring many, many, many ideas, and then they narrow down. When we put pixels before pencils, when we jump straight to the computer, we get to the fiddly bits and we start narrow and refine. We're not exploring a lot of different ideas. If you went to design school, chances are you had to do an exercise called the 100 thumbnails. And that is your teacher, your instructor gives you a problem and you have to draw 100 potential solutions to that problem. We should be headed more in that direction. When I go into startups and I go into companies that are very successful, I see, beautiful hipster graffiti murals on the wall. I see snack bins, but I don't see the work. I don't see the work out on the walls where people are exploring lots of ideas. Usually they're locked inside of MacBooks where people aren't sharing that. That's not what happens in design school, art school. We're exploring a lot of different things and narrowing down. And I've worked with a lot of designers in my day, and those that are accustomed to drawing early on, exploring ideas, tend to be the most successful, tend to come up with the best ideas. Former colleague of mine, Federico Holgado, told me that many times my sketches focus on big things and they leave out small details. You'll see squiggles for text and rectangles that represent buttons and images, but my sketches don't have to be perfect or beautiful. They just need to get my ideas across. So those of you that think to yourself, drawing, that doesn't sound like something I'm good at. When I say drawing, when I say sketching, I don't mean put a beret on, sip a cappuccino in a Parisian cafe while you're sketching and rendering the Cathedral of Notre Dame. Look, keep your cappuccino, but you can skip the other stuff. I'm talking about stuff like this. If you can draw a rectangle-ish, if you can scribble some stuff on a piece of paper, you can sketch a UI. You can work through ideas for a product. And a lot of times, it's not even the UI. We're thinking about how does this product fit into the customer's life. So it might be situational instead of the specific software UI. Aarron Irizarry, who leads the UX team at NASDAQ, told me that sketching is such a big part of their process. What he does is he gets everyone together to sketch so they have shared ownership and vision. So the thing is that when you can break down the barriers and say, I want to sketch through a lot of different ideas together, and this is not about rendering, and we're going to have a time limit, so everyone's sketches, you're not going to have enough time to render. This is going to be rough. So everyone's sketches are going to look messy. Sketching stops being the jealously guarded domain of a designer and starts to be a conversation starter that anyone can participate in. Anyone, an engineer, product manager, an executive, anyone can sketch and sit down and talk through ideas. And what Aarron does, what so many different teams do, is instead of sketching on a whiteboard and talking through a couple ideas, they present a problem. This is what we're trying to solve. We're going to take 5 minutes and draw 8 different solutions. There's an exercise called Crazy Eights. The Google Ventures team uses this, but it's actually been around for a lot longer than their book Sprint. When you do that, if you've got 5 people there doing 8 sketches, you've got 40 ideas versus standing at a whiteboard drawing together, and you might get 1 or 2 ideas. What we want is start broad and narrow down. The great thing about sketching is that we get to move fast. We get to move through ideas very quickly. And it's also the right fidelity at the right time. One of the shortcomings of jumping to the computer right away, even if you're totally fluent and can explore lots of ideas very quickly, there are people like that out in the world. Some of us can do that very easily. But when you present something that is perfectly rendered, that it just came out of Photoshop or Sketch, and you show that to a developer, a lot of times you hear no. They say, no, we can't do that. No, 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 no. And what they actually mean is, I wasn't consulted. You didn't bring me in on the idea process. I am downstream and you are forcing me to do this, and I don't like that feeling. A sketch, however, changes things. A sketch says, this is not complete. I'm working through ideas. What do you think? I want your feedback. Former colleague of mine, Todd Dominy, summed this up perfectly. Pixels freak people out. And by people, he means engineers. Engineers get freaked out. Sometimes executives do too, assuming that this is perfect. This is what we're going to build. No, we're exploring ideas. That's needs to be clear to everyone when that's happening. So, things that you can do to put pencils before pixels so we can think critically, start broad, and narrow down. Just start sketching. Let go of the fact that it has to be elegant or beautiful. It doesn't. You can use a sketchbook if you want, but I recommend loose paper. Reason being is, if you're sketching in a sketchbook, speaking from my personal experience, I often feel compelled to make that sketch nice because I'm going to flip through those pages and I always have to confront that sketch. But loose paper is something where I can make a drawing, and if it's good, I can put it on the wall, I can pass it to a colleague. If it's bad, I can put it out of its misery in a bin, and I don't have to see that again. So loose paper is a lot more flexible. Getting people together to sketch is a great thing. You get shared ownership early on, and this is a great opportunity to get participation in the ideation process, not just from design, but from different departments within your company. That's key to get buy-in, to get people to collaborate together more effectively. I mentioned earlier this exercise called Crazy Eights. Google that one, you'll find the details. You may even find a YouTube video on it as well. And speaking of YouTube, if you go to YouTube and type in sketchboards, you will definitely find a video that will show you a cool process for sketching collaboratively. All right. Fourth principle I want to share with you, fast feedback. Have you guys ever watched one of those cooking shows? Like there's one on Netflix that I particularly like called Chef's Table. And these are all just like really talented chefs filmed in a high production style, showing how sophisticated they are about their craft and how carefully they think about their craft. And the thing is that, I think about this one in particular. I don't remember the chef's name, but he's got a family farm that he inherited. He and his brother, they farm there. They grow their own vegetables, raise their own cattle, pigs, chickens, etc. And all of that creates the ingredients for his restaurant. And throughout this episode of Chef's Table, he's always tasting. He's at the farm. He's talking to the farmer about, the soil, rain, what's going on, paying attention to every single detail. He's always crunching on something. He's chewing something. He's tasting in the field. If he's at the marketplace getting something, he's eating something. If he's in the kitchen, he's got something that he's tasting as well. The reason why is because in order for a chef to advance their craft, they have to get fast feedback. They have to taste the food. They have to adjust the food so they can produce the best product. Similarly, product designers, we need to do the same thing. We always need to be crunching on something. We need to be tasting the things that we're creating. So that means we need to prototype very quickly. After we've done sketches, we can jump into a tool like Sketch and produce a high-fidelity version of that very quickly. Sync it using something like Craft, InVision. That's a tool clearly I have a bias towards, but I also have been a customer of InVision long before I joined the company, and it changed the way that we worked at MailChimp. So there are these really incredible tools. We're very fortunate to be alive at this time because these tools are changing the way product design works, that we can get to high fidelity so quickly, and so high fidelity that customers will actually think that they're using a real product, not just some pictures that are, hot linked together. There's animated transitions and all kinds of things that make it feel real. And we could use the product while we design it before we invest so much time in developing. Molly Nix at Uber, she's a designer. This is a company that's based all over the world, and they don't have time to build a new version of Uber to then test it out. So they have to prototype very quickly And they want to test not just in San Francisco, but around the world with their drivers and customers and so forth. So Molly can produce a design. She can push that over to someone in India, a design researcher who can put that in front of real customers, real drivers, and get feedback really fast, like within a day that can happen. That's incredible. That's just an incredible way for us to learn and refine our products so quickly before we invest in the wrong direction. And of course, having design pattern libraries, Material is the most well-known one, but there's so many companies investing in pattern libraries. Salesforce has a wonderful one called Lightning. Spotify has one that's private and internal called Glue. There's so many different companies that are investing in pattern libraries, and that helps them prototype faster. That's something that NASDAQ did. They had this very fragmented series of products, and they wanted to unify it. So they invested in a pattern library. It took some time to build that, and in doing so, they made prototyping and exploring new ideas much faster. And so once we have produced these prototypes, we can test with real customers, and we can do that. We don't have to test with 50 people. We don't have to test with 100 people. You could do it with just 5 users and get 90% of the most salient issues identified. And that comes from a ton of research from the Nielsen-Norman group, who have been focused on user experience and usability for decades. And they found that testing with 5 users is largely sufficient. You get 90% of the problems identified. Colleague of mine, Lindsay Campbell, she does something really interesting. She's set up a Slack channel with a lot of customers that are diehard fans of InVision. And then as we work on new prototypes, new ideas for the product, Lindsay or someone on the product team can drop those prototype links in that Slack channel with customers and get feedback directly. I think that's such a clever idea. So here are some things you can do to get fast feedback. You can start building high-fidelity prototypes quickly. After you've gone through that sketch process, you've started broad and refined down, produce high fidelity quickly, and put that in front of real customers. It's great. You'll learn a lot. And just using that prototype yourself, use it as you design it, putting it in front of your colleagues too, will also teach you a great deal. It's great if you've got a pattern library, because that makes prototyping faster. You get less focused on what should this button look like, and more focused on how does this workflow feel. Lots of higher level questions that you'll have with your product. You can test your prototype with just 5 users and learn 90% of what you need to refine. It's great if you've got a Slack channel with loyal customers, because you've got folks to share your prototype with very quickly. The 5th principle is show and tell. So if you talk to most any designer, I've mentored a lot of designers over the years, and I've often asked the question, what do you really want in your career? And they don't say, I want better healthcare, or I want more money. Some people might say that, but 90% of them say the same thing. They want a place where they can grow, where they can keep learning and get better at their craft. And that happens by getting feedback. So designers know a healthy culture, a healthy design culture, because when they go on site for an interview and they look at the studio, they see stuff on the wall and they're curious. They see lots of scribblings and debate. They see people standing around boards of designs, and they see them debating, and they think, okay, this is a place where I'm going to get pushed, where I'm going to be forced to grow and think about my craft more carefully. Creating a culture of feedback is so valuable and so critical to making great products, because without feedback from colleagues and so forth, without being able to learn and push that forward, it's really hard to know how to improve, how to level up. George who runs Greater Good Studio, these guys have gone to great lengths to create a culture of feedback so designers get that feedback that they need. And also, so the conversation is not just amongst the design team, but it's throughout the entire company about a particular project. So they've gone so far as to design a modular wall system that creates these bays for a project. So each project, they're an agency, they work with a new client and they create a project bay where they start to post their ideas. And some of these are half-baked and some of them they're refined. And sometimes it's notes and sometimes it's research about customers. All of those things can fit in this bay. You may have seen Medium posts where people talk about creating a war room. Well, this is kind of the same idea where the collective memory of everyone who's working on a project is manifest in a project bay where people can go to have conversation and debate and leave feedback, understand the status of a product. It all fits in our mind because we have this physical manifestation that we can see. Now, there are multiple ways that you can create a culture of feedback where designers can grow and products can grow as well. One thing that we all need is we need status updates. We all need to know where everyone is on the team, what's happening, how do we refine and improve things. And that happens in a stand-up. This is a typical process that's familiar with Agile. The stand-up simply just, we answer 3 questions. What have I been working on? What did I accomplish yesterday? What am I working on today? And what are the blockers? What are the things preventing my progress? So stand-up, instead of sitting down and getting comfortable and yapping for half an hour, we stand up so we don't get too comfortable and we just give a status update. Here's what we're doing. It's like a huddle. We do these all the time at InVision. The product teams do. Have a daily stand-up. I actually recommend doing them after lunch because after lunch people are most sleepy, and a stand-up is a way to kind of get people's blood pumping, and it also guards the morning, which is when our minds are clearest and most creative. The other thing that's really essential to create a culture of feedback is creating design reviews. Design reviews are when we're working on a product and it's in various states of consideration, development, that we present the design to get feedback. And we don't want to wait. We don't want a designer or a team to get so far down one path and then they present it, kind of ripping off the curtain to say, ta-da, here's what we did, because they might be on the wrong path and now they're 5 miles down there. We want them, if they're on the wrong path, they're like, half a mile down. It's easy to come back and try a new thing. So design reviews should be a regular occurrence, early on, all along a project, at the very end. And we want to get a lot of people involved here. And depends on the stage of the project. When you're at these key points, you might want to bring in people outside of the design team. More about that. So experts. Who is a domain expert? It might be a lawyer that knows that the UI that you're designing for that banking company, banking institution, there's some legal issues that we've got to satisfy. Or it might be a customer support person who sees where people struggle all the time, and they can come in and give feedback on the design, give you fresh eyes that you perspective that you haven't considered. This is also a great way to get other people aware of what's happening inside of design. And that, especially if you're in a larger organization, is an essential thing. I'll talk more about that momentarily. So when you do a design review, you don't want to just put up the work and say, tell me what you think. You want to actually frame the problem. I want to try to understand if this photo upload process is intuitive and something that can easily be done at the drop of a hat. Doesn't matter where you are in the world. Pull out your phone and upload this photo very easily from multiple locations. Right? So frame the problem to get the feedback that you need. Otherwise, people will meander around and you won't really get what you need. I recommend using a facilitator, someone who guides the conversation, who does that problem framing, who says, Sally is the designer, she's been working on this, here's the problem that she wants to get feedback on. We're going to talk about this. We're going to take 5 minutes so everyone can just come up and look at the work and think about it quietly, and then we'll start to go around and begin the conversation. Someone who can guide it and keep it on track. A facilitator is really essential so you can be productive. I would recommend that that's not the designer. What you want to avoid is, if you're the designer, you don't want to pitch your idea and say, here's what I did, I think this is brilliant, because when you do that, you rob your audience of their fresh eyes, of that beginner's mind. If you say, I tried these 5 things and I'm doing this and I think it's the best thing, you're going to get a lot of nodding heads like, yeah, great, good job, and it may not be the right thing at all. You want to get fresh perspective. So resist the urge to explain and pitch your ideas. Close your mouth, open your ears, listen to that feedback. So here's some things you can do to put this principle into practice. You can create space for posting work. If you don't have walls that are conducive for posting work, you can buy large foam core boards, like 8-foot tall foam core, 8x4. They're inexpensive, and you can post work with washi tape. It's super easy to turn any place, no matter what the space is, into a great spot to post all of the work. If you're working remotely, it's easy to do as well at InVision. We post everything into InVision. Not a surprise, we use our own product for that. We use one of the features called boards, where we can post all kinds of different versions of a design, and people can comment and add to that very easily. Keeping people in sync with a stand-up daily is a really key thing, so people can stay productive. And a big part of this is we're trying to create this culture of feedback where designers can grow and the product can grow with them. You want to schedule regular design reviews so designers don't get so far down a path and get lost on the wrong idea. And it's great to invite experts into design reviews so you get a fresh perspective, and that's also going to help you make connections with other teams. Collaboration will be key. As your company scales, your team scales, you're not the only ones touching the product. You have to work together. And structure design reviews that aren't meandering, where you frame the problem and have a facilitator, will help you be more productive. The 6th principle I want to share with you is called lateral design. Now, it's common to Agile that we see cross-functional teams that are made up of engineers, product managers, and designers. Airbnb follows cross-functional team structure as so many other companies do. They're not special in that respect. And at Airbnb and many other companies, they call it EPD, Engineering Product Design. So it's cross-functional place where people focus on a particular problem, and we try to cut the distance between domains so we can work holistically on a product. It kind of looks like this. Think of it almost like pouring water from glass to glass, passing a baton from person to person. This is a way for us to, designer can produce something, pass that over to an engineer who starts building, modifying, revising, researcher gives additional perspective, or product manager gives additional perspective. That goes back into design, back into engineering. That instead of it being very linear, it can be non-linear. And what I found is a common byproduct in these situations is that we get teams where there's a lot of respect between domains, because designers in these situations get to learn more about engineering, and engineers get to learn more about design, and both get to learn more about product, about business, and so forth. So that's a really positive thing. Now, there is a pitfall that I have found in that designers often, the common ratio is like 5 developers and 1 designer. And if you're in a cross-functional team where you're the only designer, you feel like you're on an island and you feel lost and you don't get the feedback that you need to grow. So there are ways to address that. Slack, for example, they use something called paired design, where they always have a designer paired with some other designer that can help them get unstuck on problems, give them feedback, and basically just collaborate with them on things. And that doesn't always mean that there's 2 designers on a team, but at the very least that designer on team A can go consult with designer on team B, and they can work through ideas. Jeff Gotthelf, who wrote Lean UX, has this to say about how cross-functional teams work. That most companies, there are a lot of companies that build lists of features, and then they task teams with building those lists. And then when the features launch, the team is rewarded for completing their work, but no reward is given for the feature actually solving a business problem, only for deployment. So what he's talking about here is measuring outcomes. The thing that you made, how did that change the user experience? How did it fit into the customer's life? How did it affect our business outcomes? Instead of measuring outputs, that you made 10 things this year, but how did that move the needle? And that's a really key thing in lateral design to guide these cross-functional teams. So if you're new to cross-functional teams and lateral design, here are some things you can do to start to stick your toe in the water, because this starts to get into organizational design, and that is something that comes not as easily as some of these other principles. If you're new, you can choose a small project with a clear deadline and put together a team with designers, developers, a product person. I highly recommend having a researcher on that team as well. Define clear success by outcomes, not by outputs. What are they trying to accomplish? How are they trying to change the user experience? And depending on how that goes, you might find that it's good to share that with the company, because there's great success that came out of that, and that can be the thing that pushes your company towards this new organizational model. We're down to the last principle I want to share with you guys, and that's break the black box. So what I have seen in working at companies that are very small and companies that are very large is that design can easily thrive in small companies, small organizations. Because if you work on a design, and a lot of times it might be an executive next to you, an engineer next to you, and you can just pull them over and say, hey, what do you think about this? How should we solve this problem? People look over your shoulder. The conversations come really easily and naturally. But when a company grows, there's more specialization. Just the physical space, how it grows and separates people, separates teams, that makes it hard to know what other people are doing, makes it hard to understand other domains, and design becomes much less visible. People don't understand it. And if people don't understand design, it just loses its power. If they don't get the value that design plays, if they think of it as, well, we'll sprinkle on some design later. We'll just decorate it and make it look nice. Make this look pretty, is what they say. If that's the way that people think about design, they're not respecting it. You won't get consideration. You won't get a spot at the table for those big decisions where the product is being formed. Right? So design, as you move into larger companies, is not just about sitting at your computer and pushing pixels. Well, that's a good thing, and it's still important, but you have to get away from your computer, and you have to build social capital. You have to get to know people. You have to spend time with other folks and build rapport. And that might be an engineer that you schedule weekly lunch with, or a product manager that's not on your team, and you have coffee with every other week, an executive, quality assurance person, a lawyer. The more people you can talk to, the better, because you're not the only one touching the product anymore. Everybody is. Everybody has a hand in design, in big D design, something that influences the outcomes and the user experience. And if you want your ideas to be honored and connected and informed, and the product to be the best product it can be, because that's ultimately what we want. We want to produce great products. You've got to connect with people. Julie Zhu saw Facebook grow and change quite dramatically. She was at Facebook early on when it was really tiny, and she saw some changes. She says that the graph of impact tends to correlate with how many people you need to work with effectively. And once I realized this, I started to see my interactions with other people differently. It was no longer about winning battles or proving that I was right, but about developing stronger collaborative relationships. That's it, guys. Collaborative relationships is something we don't often think of as essential to doing great design, but I got to tell you, it is. And those of us that can figure this out, our careers grow. Those of us that can't figure that out, our careers unfortunately go in a very negative direction. You might not stay with the current organization. You might get deselected, as they say. So, designers, whether you're a design leader or an individual contributor, you need to get in the practice of creating inroads into design. And I mentioned earlier having design reviews where you invite leaders, other people from different teams into your design conversations, posting work so it's visible. People will come by and leave feedback. They'll see what's going on. That's essential. It's really important. So, things you can do to put this principle into practice. Break the black box. Get away from your desk. Start building relationships. It's as simple as that. Recurring coffee and lunch without an agenda of tell me what you're working on, but just get to know the person. How are your kids? What's going on in your life? That becomes really key to doing great work. Invite stakeholders into your design reviews so they know what's going on and they aren't surprised when you present big ideas. Get designs out of your computers, get them somewhere where everyone can see them. And watch out for those big reveals where you design something, you think you've got it all figured out, and then you present it to everyone. That creates a sense of, why wasn't I consulted? Why wasn't I part of this process? You want to get shared ownership early on so people understand and buy into the design idea. That's it, guys. Those are the 7 principles of product design that I want to share with you. I'm happy to hang out and answer a few questions for you if you have some.
Well, thank you very much, Aarron. That was probably one of my personal favorite presentations we've had so far in the series. So I just want to take the time to thank you for giving us such a delightful presentation.
Thank you. Sorry, I coughed and sneezed my way through it.
Oh, well, I have to commend you for toughing it through the cold over the webinar. We appreciate it. Now, as Aarron said, it's a perfect opportunity for us to dive into a few questions, if you have any for him. And while we do that, I'm just going to make myself the presenter again, and then we can dive into a small Q&A period. All right, so looking at the questions, we have a few of them. So I'll kind of start from the top. And I'm looking at these here.
So what do you guys think? Did this resonate with you? Does it sound familiar?
Now, while we're waiting,
yourself nodding your head.
Well, we're waiting for a few of them to come in. One question that came up that I saw earlier was, how would you recommend somebody breaking into the world of product design from a more kind of generalistic design role? Whether they're in an agency or they're just doing marketing design or something like that.
Yeah, I think that a lot of times a side project is your best bet. There's so much great stuff on the web, to be able to learn how to work through product design. We're actually working on a site that we're going to be launching very soon that talks about the core principles of product design and design thinking, kind of goes deeper into all of these things that I talked about today. So that'll be a great resource coming soon. It'll be called designbetter.co. It's coming very soon. But I think that a side project is really important, especially if you're young and you're early on in your career and you kind of want to, make your mark. A project that makes sense for you, that solves a problem for you, that you can be passionate about and work on nights and weekends, helps you hone your craft. That's great. So many people I've hired over the years had some kind of side hustle like that. And oftentimes their resume wasn't what got them the job. It was that side project where I could see that You know, they're really passionate, they're exploring, they're curious. You know, maybe some things aren't quite right, but I could see that they're, you know, they had a fire in their belly. So I think that's pretty key.
Awesome. That's great to know. And I just want to take a time. A few people have asked if we'll be sharing the recording afterwards, and the answer is yes. We'll be emailing out to all the registrants within a week, I'd say. So keep your eyes open on your inboxes for that one. I just want to say before we get to the next question, a lot of people are saying thank you, Aarron. You're an amazing speaker. I've learned so much in this hour. So just a few
Awesome.
comments there.
Thanks, guys.
So Min has asked if you recommend using Scrum or any other agile management techniques for design projects.
Yeah, you know, use what makes sense for your organization. I'm the sort of guy that's I'm a little hesitant to jump in on any specific approach because it feels kind of like dogma, and I stop thinking critically about what we're doing and why we're doing it. But you know, if that works for you, there's certainly a lot of companies where it does. But if you're spending more of your time focusing on learning the process and trying to keep up with the process and do it the air quotes here right way, you might be spinning your wheels. Is there a simpler, more direct way for you to work? Larger organizations tend to invest in those processes more directly because they need it to scale. And if you're a smaller organization, I would say stay scrappy and don't get invested in a particular approach just yet. Once you kind of hit the 100 to 200 employee mark, then you start to have to think about the process a lot more and refine.
Agreed, and I think that last point that you brought up in your seven principles, can resonate with a lot of disciplines. I'm not necessarily a designer or developer by trade, but even at our own company, we're growing at an accelerated rate, and it's increasingly important to make yourself available and include those stakeholders
Yeah,
in the early stages of the project.
yeah,
And that kind of
very true.
transitions nicely into a question from Steve, who's asking, is it necessary to involve everyone in the company in the early stage of design? And I would say perhaps to elaborate a bit, like, how do you know who are the right stakeholders to involve in a project?
It's I think it's going to vary with every company, but um, you might ask yourself questions like, who are the people that derail it down the road? In the past, when we worked on this, the CEO came in and did the swoop and poop, and you know, said, "Oh, you're 90% of the way through this project. I'd like you to do it this way." Well, maybe you should have gotten them involved early on. Is there a key engineer that might have thrown things off, designer or something? So if that's the case, you definitely want those people involved early on. People with domain expertise that really understand that problem clearly, um, or have perspective that you don't. Those are people you want involved early on. You need design on democracy where you've got 50 people in the design process, but you'll probably know the key people that will have the perspective that you need, that you'll need to get buy-in from further down the road. Those are people that you want to be in the conversation early on. So when it does come time to sync up with their team or prepare for some bigger launch, it's not like you're trying to catch them up. That's a very dangerous scenario, because if they disagree or they see that differently, then you're in a real bind. You may have wasted months of time.
Great. Hopefully that addresses your question there, Steve. In a similar vein too, Sharad is asking, what's your advice for one-man design teams where it's natural and organic for them to end up working in their own kind of holes, if you will, and scope for collaboration is much smaller than in a larger team environment?
I think if you're working individually, break the black box doesn't really apply to you, because there's no one you really have to be accountable to. I think a lot of the other principles definitely do apply, that guess less, still critical and important. Pencils before pixels. The the vision, to communicate and mobilize big teams is less important, but it's still important for you to understand, answer that question, how does this fit into my customers' lives? And I think that when you're working individually, it's very easy because you're so invested personally in the product, and it's very easy to ignore the critical feedback you hear from people. Uh, and just press forward because you feel like I'm part of the audience, so this is what I'm going to make. Maybe you saw that episode of Silicon Valley, this season 2, where they designed their product and they had only looked at it themselves and showed it to their friends, and then when people who were in their target audience, who weren't engineers, used it, like their their venture capital partner used it, and she said, like, this sucks, I have no idea what this is. And she said, did you only show this to your friends? And they're like, yes, and they're the ones that understand it, and that's why it's important. But they're not actually the people that are going to use this. So, yeah, I think that's a very dangerous thing if you're solo and, as you say, you're stuck in your own hole. You got to get out of your hole. You got to show that product to other people, or you got to talk to people in your audience to learn more and get their perspective.
Great. Hopefully that gave some more insight into handling that kind of situation. We have a few questions kind of centered around the idea of advocating for or facilitating change within an organization that don't necessarily have a product or design thinking approach, or they're not necessarily open to some of these concepts like sketching out ideas where they want to see high fidelity mock-ups right away. Do you have any suggestions in a broad sense, or maybe to one of those specific examples, how a single designer can help advocate for some of those changes in their teams and in their organization?
Well, I think there's some things you needn't ask for permission to do. Sketching is something that you can do for yourself to work through ideas, and you don't need to show that to a lot of people. In fact, at Spotify they sketch, but a lot of times designers are doing that for themselves to work through their ideas. That sketching is a thinking process. And in terms of like organizational change, that's a tough one because, and it's the question that I hear most often. There are some organizations, they haven't yet bought into how design will influence their success or lack thereof. Looking at competitors who are, if you do have a competitor that's winning on design, that's helpful to create a fire under people. Looking at, aspirational products that people say we want to be like that. That can be helpful for people to, how did they do that? They did that because they're following design, using design principles, design thinking, that sort of thing. Design thinking is really interesting, and I think it's a really important Trojan horse that's happening right now, that so many big companies are investing in the design thinking methodology, which comes from IDEO and the Stanford D School. And that is not, something that's just for designers. It's about problem solving, and that, as it infiltrates companies like IBM and all these big conservative companies, we'll start to see more of that happening in what I described earlier, little d companies. They'll start to get that as well. It's not always easy to create change inside of a company, and you might get to a point where it's futile, and you might say, I need to jump ship for a place that will actually let me grow in the way that I need to grow. So that may be the other option.
Great. I think we have just a few minutes left for maybe one or two more questions. So one of them that has come up, this one in particular from Lance. So a lot of people probably on the webinar today and in the Shopify Partner Program work as consultants, doing design or development projects for clients and other businesses, of course. And Lance is asking if you know of a workaround or a way when trying to, survey those end users for those large companies that you're consulting for, when the client is not necessarily comfortable giving you that direct access to the user. I don't know if you came across this in your past when you were consulting, but what would you recommend to somebody who's having trouble, surveying those end users?
Yeah, so there are a couple things you could do. You could work with a recruiting company to help you find company customers to interview. Surveys won't make sense in that situation, but you can still find people to interview. Um, I have found that recruiting companies are often a little hard to work with, or at least the few that I have worked with. They require so much guidance about the right customer to speak with, um, and it's almost to the point where you could have recruited the person yourself. Um, so the Google Ventures team has an interesting technique. They create a screener and they post that on Craigslist, and people, they say, we're looking for people like this to come talk to us and try something out. Um, it'll take this much amount of your time. Take this survey, and we'll see if you're the right fit. This is what the compensation will be. And then they weed people out and they find the right folks that way. I think that's the best, like lowest fi way to find the right customers to show a product to, get feedback from. That works really well. The other thing that you can do that's more of a long-term thing is change the way that you sell your work. When you sell, product design, sell it as we are connected with your customer. The reason why we make great products and we had this success with case study A, case study B, case study C is because we are connected to those customers. And that's just part of doing business with us. So if you're excited about our work and you're excited about us working with you, this will be a prerequisite, is that we get access to some of your customers. We don't need a data dump from your customer database. We need like 50 people, something to that effect. And a lot of times, it's not that big of a deal to do. It is a big deal once you're already into the contract and they weren't expecting it, but the way that you sell your work can probably help you a lot.
Awesome. And yeah, I totally agree. I think, trying to bake in that necessity to have access to a few end users when you're, in that proposal pitching stage with the client is definitely the right approach to take. Set up those expectations in advance and let them know, like, if you want us to produce the highest quality work that we do in the processes that we follow, these are some of the guidelines that we have to adhere to.
Yeah.
And I think we have one final question. It's probably a good one to round it off. Is Sean is asking if you have any resources that you would recommend anyone looking to learn a little bit more about product design. So any books or other kind of content pieces that they should check out.
On the spot, let's see. Product design resources. I am drawing a total blank. I can tell you I'm excited when designbetter.co is out, because that will be a fantastic resource for people that want to learn more about product design. Off the top of my head, I can't think of a particular book that is nailing it right now. Bear with me. I'm moving my microphone, opening up my closet, looking at my books right now. Oh, the Sprint book is really great. I think that methodology isn't for everyone, but I think that I like that they're so clear about this is how we solve problems. It's very much inspired and informed by the design thinking methodology. Let's see. Yeah, there's also a great book called The Moment of Clarity, which is about doing customer research and getting to know customers and finding product ideas and finding the right solution. I think that one's really great.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I would even argue, over at InVision, you guys have a lovely blog that focuses on product design. For more of those kind of
That's true.
tidbit content. So, I'm a dedicated reader of that blog as well. So I would definitely suggest, especially if anyone's using InVision as a product design tool, to check out the content they have over there, because it's pretty good.
I will say I am consistently blown away by the content that's on our blog, on the InVision blog. I'm not involved with that, but the team that is working on it, they're doing an incredible job.
Definitely. So I think that'll be the last question that we take. I'm sorry that we went a bit over, but hopefully we were able to, cover most of the questions that you guys had. I just want to take this time to thank you once again, Aarron, for, showing this great presentation to us. It was extremely insightful, and we were very happy to have you today.
Well, thanks so much for having me. Sorry again for the hacks and coughs. Hopefully I get over this soon, but thanks for your time today, guys.
Yeah, no problem. And
if anyone has follow-up questions, they can just catch me on Twitter. My handle's Aarron. It's 2 A's and 2 R's. My dad misspelled my name at the hospital, so I'm stuck that way. So, yeah, I'll see you on Twitter.
That sounds great. And for everyone who's still on here, just in case you're wondering, our next partner session is in 2 weeks on December 13th. It'll be with Vitaly Friedman, who is the editor-in-chief at Smashing Magazine, and he's going to be going through what he calls a few dirty little tricks from the dark corners of front end. So these are kind of practical, hacky almost techniques that you can use in real-life projects when you're working with clients
Also,
your own team.
Mind-blowing tricks, I will say that.
Well, there you have it. We have an endorsement right from Aarron himself.
Yeah, Vitaly's awesome.
Okay, well, with that being said, thank you, everybody, and I hope you have a great rest of your afternoon. And thank you again, Aarron.
Take care.
Okay, bye-bye.